Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another product review. This time I'm taking a look at Escape from Miklagard, an old-school Essentials-compatible adventure from the Fictionaut, published by Stellagama Publishing, who were kind enough to send me a review copy, which has been sitting on my desk for quite a while because I got really behind on reviews. My apologies. Escape from Miklagard is an old-school Essentials-compatible sandbox point-crawl adventure for beginner characters. It is inspired by things like Escape from New York and the historical sacking of cities like Rome. Apparently, it is meant to be the first in a trilogy of adventures. It is available as a PDF and in print-on-demand format, clocking in at around 69 pages with a full-color cover and two-column interior interspersed with inline illustrations. The artwork is detailed and well-suited to the theme. Honestly, the only thing I could really recommend is that the hexcrawl map could have been a little cleaned up, but aside from that, the quality is certainly there in that regard. In terms of content, it is split up into a foreword as well as 10 sections. The foreword goes over media and historical inspirations that went into the concept, while the introduction gives a brief description of the module, as well as a quick introduction to the author of the Fictionaut and Stellagama Publishing in general. The background section details the collapse of an empire through family machinations and gross mismanagement, which leads to the emperor fleeing the city just as unpaid mercenaries their armies begin to converge upon it. The adventuring party is assumed to be in the city just as things start their final collapse. The setting overview gives a broad and brief write-up of the empire at large, as well as various categories of mercenaries, adventuring groups, and gangs, just defining them for future reference. The city before the fall gives a background on the physical and organizational layout of the city of Miklagard prior to its collapse, including some talk of various districts and some smatterings of background history, all in a quick, concise little group of paragraphs. Making it out alive of Miklagard explains how the city is represented in an abstract set of hexes defined by monuments in the area, and then gives rules for generating a street as needed when the party has to stop in an area. This includes the hexcrawl map, which, as I said, is really nice, but it kind of should have been cleaned up a little bit. Anyway, the contents start with a set of tables that describe which particular building on that street is, as well as what may be found inside. This can include even encounters. These tables extend for several pages, split up by building category and in individual types within that particular area. Notably, it's at this part which the writing does begin to falter a bit, at least mechanically. The first few sections were very solid, while this one has some awkward wording and misusage from time to time. There may be things lost in translation. I'm getting the idea that the author of the Fictionaut seems to be multilingual, which is better than I can say, but probably needs a little bit more editing in that regard. There's nothing a good editor couldn't fix. Anyway, it doesn't detract from the overall feel. It just breaks the flow a little bit. I'm okay with it. Also, there's this idea of an eschaton clock that's built into it, which is basically a time limit that advances as characters spend time in the city, making things worse as time goes on, with more time spent meaning you get more encounters and eventually the arrival of frost giants. I'll get into more of that later. Landmarks of Miklagard details the landmarks visible in each hex of the city. They are physically described, given a bit of history, and then any puzzles, traps, and loot they contain is gone into, because if somebody's got to loot it, might as well be the adventurers. These are the major loot draws that are attracting the unpaid mercenaries to the city, and even one or two of them can set a party up for the fair amount of wealth that's looted, especially if they're low level. But in order to do so, it does add a fair amount to the eschaton clock. Chaos reigning in the streets, which is after all of this, describes the various events and encounters that can happen as the eschaton clock advances. Technically speaking, it's supposed to be a chart, but it's not well described as one. The events range from combat or non-combat encounters to traps and hazards, just designed to portray a city that's in the midst of societal and physical collapse. Basically just throws challenges at the players as they go through. The opposing force tiers describes each of the factions and their various makeups that you might encounter, and either ally with or oppose while you're going through the city. These each have a few tiers that describe how the faction acts. The Imperial Army and Free Companies are described in turn, and then there's a few relevant NPCs with their background, impact on the story, where they appear within the game, their stats and abilities. The Grand Empire's army is detailed, along with stats for the soldiers and animals associated with them, and any special gear. The Gruthak then follow, being nomadic peoples from a wasteland created by a magical war. The Elfland Gallowglass are detailed, and then the Civiz Militia, the Goblinoid Landsnecks, Myrmidon Hoplites, and so forth, each with their own little faction that you can encounter, pretty much banded together against one another, and sometimes, allied with one another. There's also more minor factions, such as the Saurian Condottieri, the Gnomes, and so forth. These various creature types and militaries can provide a wide variety of encounters and conflicts as the characters duck through the chaotic city streets. You get past those and you get to the freelance fellowships. They detail alternate adventuring groups, and there are a few adventurers detailed, along with their background, general drive and tactics, and general description. Notably, these aren't really statted out, but are rather just generally detailed for non-combat interactions. The book finally closes out with a brief paragraph concluding the escape, hinting at a sequel set in the same region to come later. And I kind of rushed through that because it is relatively brief, all in all. It's actually pretty well organized, comparatively. So what do I think about it? Let's just dive right into it. From a plot and a writing point of view, Escape from Miklagard presents an interesting scenario that is not well represented in adventure design. I can't, off the top of my head, name more than one or two things about a city being actively sacked while the players are in it. Fleeing and possibly looting a city as you go offers a bit of a unique experience, as well as a fair amount of replayability, as there are several ways to depart from the city, and a very small amount of time to do so. Furthermore, the chaos of the situation will probably lead to some dramatic differences in how parties approach the adventure, as a more heroic and civic-minded party may be faced with a different set of choices than a group of mercenaries that are just out for themselves. The city of Miklagard is detailed enough without being bogged down by minutiae, and the background information given by events, factions, and locations themselves gives enough hints at a broader setting to draw interest while being sadly lacking in certain specifics. Thankfully, a party running through the city as it is collapsing will likely not be too concerned about the exact history of every place that they pass by. It was certainly well written enough to make me wonder about the proposed sequels. While I have criticized the mechanics of the writing, it is easy enough to skim over, and the presentation is excellent otherwise. I will say that a light touch on the city's overall layout lends itself to streamlining play rather than having to sort through all these pre-existing detailed maps. My only main issue with Escape from Miklagard is the eschaton clock, which is referenced a few times throughout the book, but ends up being poorly explained. Unless I'm blind or something, and I have been in the past and just totally missed mechanics, but I couldn't figure out where it was thoroughly documented as to exactly how it's supposed to work in this game, which is going to end up with a fair few interpretations on how to execute it. It's a little bit disappointing, since it seems like a great idea. I'm sure you can just wing it. The implementation just falls a little short, or specifically the detailed implementation. And I'm just realizing, actually, that this is the second time I'm mentioning something like this for something from the Fictionaut. And that's 2 to 2 on interesting, standout adventure concepts that have some sort of glaring fault in the actual execution. At least with Escape from Miklagard, you can sort of rule of thumb the main mechanic and run with it. Or maybe it is detailed, and I'm just blind and I missed it during my read-through. It's happened in the past. I did page through the adventure a few times, though, just to make sure. And I could only find kind of a half-mentioned system talking about some sort of dice pool without going into how it works. Anyway, that having been said, I have a very much easier time recommending Escape from Miklagard than I did the Scriptorium adventure, which is the other one I covered from it. The unique concept, the flexible hex crawl nature of the city, and the sheer replayability can make it something that can be run a few times easily, especially if you're looking for something to throw down with very little preparation for a night or two with a new group, or just as a break from something else, and you can even run it several times with the same group just to see what they do each time. With that, I think I am going to wrap it up here. You've been the RPG Crawler with my review from Escape from Miklagard. Relatively brief review, but it is just an adventure. As always, I will put where you can pick it up below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.